Lore Together is proud to be part of the Boss Rush Games Network. Feel free to find out more at bossrushgames.com/network. Hi, I'm Safi.
And I'm Mystic.
And this is Lore Together. This is the podcast where a husband and wife team go over all the storytelling, world building, and characters of video games because it's what we like to do together. We lore together.
Yep, and this is episode 71.
Woohoo! Getting into the 70s, the prime of our podcast. I don't know. I was trying to make a joke and I just don't know where my brain is.
That's okay, we're both tired.
Yes.
Before we get into the podcast, though, if you'd like to contact us, you can do that over on Twitter and Instagram at LoreTogether. You can do that through email at loretogether@gmail.com. And if you'd like to support the podcast, you can do that two ways. One, giving us a 5-star review wherever you can, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other places. And two is by supporting us over on Patreon at patreon.com/loretogether, where you can pay a per-episode pledge to get early access to episodes as well as other stuff. I do intend on recording our first chapter of Unreal sometime soon.
We have our Loric series, which gets released early that way.
Except that is also having a problem because Skyrim keeps actually updating.
And then affects the mods and everything.
Yes. In fact, Skyrim just released on GOG.
And we have a couple mini episodes we have not released to the public.
Yes.
Including, I was just reminded today that we have our mini episode about the voice acting career of Keith David. So if that's something that you want to hear about,
that one is available.
Yeah.
So anyway, this is episode 71. As I said, you are not going to understand what this one is at all. It is a newer game.
We're back to a newer game. I will say that I barely understood what was going on in the Journeyman project, and when I re-listened to our episode, I was very surprised of how cognizant I sounded throughout that whole episode. I was like, how did I follow
And then
any
you
of this?
played it, and we ran across one of those delightful little things that happens when a game is 30 years old.
Our Thursday live streams are usually pretty smooth, especially when we're doing the alternate Thursday Skies of Arcadia. But occasionally, like this last one we did for the Journeyman project, you'll have controls that just suddenly don't work anymore and make the game unplayable. Yeah. And luckily, that was like at the 50-minute mark.
Yeah.
So,
well, we may get back to that one. It went okay. We got further than I thought we would, so that's good.
Yeah, there we go.
Anyway, this is a 2019 game.
Okay.
Called Superliminal.
Superliminal.
Yes, by Pillow Castle Games.
Pillow Castle.
Yes.
Interesting.
And
they sound like a sleepy bunch.
That will make sense in a minute.
Okay.
This is a weird one, and it may be a shorter episode. This game is a little light on lore. We're basically retelling the story, the game.
I feel like half the time you say this might be a shorter episode, we end up having one of our longer episodes.
Not always.
Not always. But I feel like it's like 50-50. Like, it doesn't always... You're always concerned, and then suddenly we extrapolate on something.
Yeah, this one's more about the gameplay and the world building in the gameplay. I mean, there's not a lot of world building. It's one person's journey.
Okay.
And just to kind of put this out there, I am not a person who gets motion sick during games that much. I've pulled off 180 spins in Twitch shooters like Unreal Tournament with no problem.
Yeah.
I play 7 Days to Die and Left 4 Dead feeling great. And one of my favorite things to do in any first-person game like Skyrim, as we just mentioned, is to parkour or jump from high locations. You get a slight vertigo, but nothing too bad. This game, I was feeling sick and breaking out in a cold sweat within 40 minutes.
This just reminds me of just a flashback, and I know I've told you this story before, Mystic, but it always reminds me of this. So, in college, my boyfriend at the time and I went to see the movie Cloverfield when it came out. Mm-hmm. The first one, which the first two are worth watching, and then everything else with Cloverfield on it is kind of meh. But the first one, which was the monster movie, we were really excited to see it. We were like, oh man, America gets its own like big monster. Then we were watching it in this small town theater, and the staff literally came out in the front before they played any of the previews and said, we just want to warn you that there's been a lot of motion sickness associated with this movie because of its the way it's filmed. So we want to remind you, you can leave that door to bathrooms this way and that door to bathrooms this way. And if you don't think you can get that far, there are literally buckets at the end of the aisle for you. And I luckily was fine, but my at the time boyfriend did get kind of motion sick, and there was a moment I was like, "Where's that bucket again?" So it's something I'm used to usually having the iron stomach when it comes to that kind of stuff compared to my friends. I think you and I, when it comes to like vertigo and dizziness, we're both at the same level of usually okay.
Yeah. I will be, full disclosure here. Part of the reason I'm doing this episode, there is story here. It is, as I said, a little lighter on the story.
It's not like Tetris where
it's not like Tetris, but it's lighter on the story. Like there's characters, we know their name, we don't know anything else about them. Mm-hmm. But part of the reason I'm doing it is because I played this blind for the patrons, for the blind playthrough, and there is enough story here that I can make my suffering playing it
You
worth
want to
it.
legitimize your suffering, and apparently you also want to make me suffer when I do this on the live stream.
Yes, because that's marriage.
You better have a bucket nearby, because if you got pukey, like I will, guys, I'm gonna puke live on YouTube.
No, we will give you some Dramamine. If I had known that this,
I'm afraid to take Dramamine. I'm afraid it would make me sleepy.
That's true.
So.
If I had known this was going to play with perception as much as it does, I probably would have taken something beforehand anyway, or done something to prepare myself for. I again, going into this blind, like I knew it had to do with, I thought it'd be like Portal, playing with, orientation or something.
And that's easy because that's very much like a roller coaster ride.
This is like, it plays with it differently. There's that aspect too, also on top of it.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's begin. We, the player, I don't know if we are given a name, have been having a hard time of life, dealing with self-doubt and worthlessness. We have signed up with the Pierce Institute to use one of their Somnosculpt dream therapy rooms.
So we're getting very sci-fi here. You know what? Let me know how this works, because I'm already reminded of a sci-fi story that I really love called The Lathe of Heaven by Ursula K. Le Guin. It's a one-off novel, and it's totally worth your time if you like her storytelling. It's a really good one.
There is a Dr. Glenn Pierce who runs the Pierce Institute, but we don't know if he created Somnosculpt. Now, dream interpretation and contextualization as part of psychotherapy is a long-studied discipline.
Yes.
It's been around in some form for thousands of years.
Yeah, a lot of cultures have very specific symbolism in your dreams, pertaining to something happening in real life.
Yeah, but more of a modern psychology in interpreting dreams and stuff goes back to Freud and Jung and all that stuff.
Oh, Freud.
Yeah. Built a good base work, but was very far from the mark.
It's you can tell if somebody is trying to impress a psychologist if they mention Freud, because most people of like that discipline of studying the mind, they appreciate what Freud did, but like nobody's really seriously considering his theory that much anymore. So, for practice.
Either way, we start off with a standard orientation protocol, which is a basic tutorial on the game mechanics. WASD moves, mouse looks, left mouse button interacts, right mouse button rotates things we are holding.
Okay, which it's nice to go back to WASD, because that's what my brain is now trained to do.
German Project, for those who don't know, does not use WASD. It uses the arrow keys, so yeah.
That was very confusing.
The more interesting thing here, though, is that none of this is UI. There is no UI like we're used to. Your WASD controls and your mouse controls are written on a wall when you log in.
Oh.
When you start playing, not log in. When you learn to jump, it's on it's like on a sign, like one of those wet floor sign type things. It's like space equals jump. Like,
oh, weird. Huh.
Yeah, it's because the start of the game is entirely in a dream, so they're trying to keep it all diegetic. Okay. So
that makes sense.
The first thing we see as the orientation begins is you begin staring at a blank wall, like I said, with our basic movement controls written on it in like Sharpie. Turning around, we see a table with a terms of service agreement on it, and I tried to make out the details as I was playing. It's not easy.
There are hints to what it's actually talking about?
It looks like a pretty boilerplate standard TOS, even talking about parking passes and such. So I think it may just be stock or whatever, stock imagery.
Okay.
Or just somebody made it up and just pulled one of those freeform type things.
Somebody pulled out an agreement from their lease and just copy pasted it.
Yeah. So signing the paperwork, the wall where our movement controls were suddenly has a doorway in it.
Ooh.
Yeah, reality changes a lot here. Walking through, we arrive in a new room with the most pivotal mechanic in the game. On the table are pawns and a paper that simply reads, "Perception is reality. Grab."
Okay.
Grabbing a pawn and putting it down changes its size according to what I call no logic and what one write-up of this game called dreamlike rationale. I think both descriptions fit.
No, I think dream logic is a very specific type of logic. I've always felt like, I think dream logic is this idea that like while you're in the space, it makes sense and you don't question it as much. It's a little less Alice in Wonderland where she's still confused while all these changes and these strange things are happening, but she acknowledges that that is the world.
Right.
It's just not logical, versus like dream logic is it wouldn't make sense in your usual reality, but while you're in the middle of it, you're like, oh, this is okay.
Yeah, this game is very much about diegetic versus non-diegetic in some ways.
Okay.
Diegetic is things that take place, for those who don't know.
Right.
Diegetic is things that take place in the universe, and non-diegetic is things that are part of the medium, but not in universe. So like a movie soundtrack, if it's the city ambience, that's diegetic. But if it's an orchestral score that the orchestra is not there, that's non-diegetic.
Yeah. So like musicals tend to be when you're singing along with everybody. It's diegetic in the modern musical, but like in old Hollywood, a lot of it was non-diegetic. Like suddenly the person was having an emotion and it was a stage performance in their head. So that music is usually what it's most linked to, but Mystic correctly has pointed out that your whole perception of the medium is diegetic versus non-diegetic.
Yeah, a UI that is not in universe. So like here we have a diegetic UI. It is telling us the WASD controls in universe, even though it doesn't make sense in universe, but it's still in universe. It's diegetic.
Like kind of like if you play Doom, it's diegetic with the information you have, right? Because the idea is that you have a helmet that's displaying how many bullets you have and your health and everything.
I believe so.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm not 100% on that.
Whereas non-diegetic, I feel like would be more of like in a fantasy game because you don't really have a helm that's going to explain what your health is, but you as a person
Actually,
needs to know.
a really good one for diegetic would be Horizon Zero Dawn.
Yes.
Because all of your UI elements, for the most part, when it comes to interacting with things, is because your little hollow emitter thing on the side of your head is telling you so.
Yeah.
It's hard to truly describe how this perception altering thing feels. Holding a pawn in the air and then catching it as it falls towards you changes its size.
Okay.
So if you hold it up above you and drop it, it is coming closer to your eye. If you grab it, it's now bigger.
Oh, it just retains the size that it did while it was moving.
Yes. If you take it and push it up against a wall and walk towards it, it gets smaller again.
Interesting.
So,
okay.
Yeah, it's all about perception. There's a lot of weird warping in this game and a lot of optical illusions. So from here, we move on from a simply what is a plaything. These pawns don't have a puzzle associated with them. They're just kind of experiment and play.
It's just letting you know that this is where we're at right now.
To the first actual puzzles with the standard pressure plate, stacking cubes, and stuff that you would come to expect from a first-person puzzle game after Portal.
Yep, that's fair. Now is this a companion cube? Does it have hearts? And will we be expected to murder it later?
But there is a generic GLaDOS-style voice that talks to us.
Okay.
That's not an insult to this game, by the way. GLaDOS just feels to have more personality because she is actually a antagonist.
Yeah.
So GLaDOS is more antagonistic.
Yes.
This one also has that cold clinical humor, but is a little bit more generic.
More like, more of a benevolent force? Like,
no. Just
so they're not aiding you? They're just...
It's just a voice.
Okay.
Yeah. Sometimes it's antagonistic, but generally it's not.
Okay.
Yeah. The game does throw some subtle story beats to you here. The voice of Faux GLaDOS tells us that we're doing fine. There is a plan. This is just orientation.
So she's trying to be reassuring.
Yeah, but it's like that pre-recorded way. It's not like GLaDOS as an AI talking to you.
Okay. Interesting. Okay.
However, we start to see things like broken windows, misaligned doors, signs that are not affixed to the wall properly, stuff like that.
Okay.
In the final room of the orientation, we're told to exit through the door, but it's been bricked over. Like the door opens and there's just brick wall.
Oh, interesting.
Our only egress is to break down the wall using a block of cheese. Make the cheese big enough and no wall will contain it. Safia's just giving me a look.
So would you have to do you have to wedge the cheese?
It is a cheese wedge, yes.
So, and then you move towards it to make it closer. And then you...
Well, no, you drop it and that makes it grow. Because you're changing, because you hold it up and it kind of always pushes it to where the furthest it can range. So when you hold it up and you drop it, it's falling towards you and grows larger.
Okay.
So you'll understand as you play. It's weird.
Okay.
It's not 100% how you think, probably. Maybe it is. I don't know. I found it a little... I got it quickly, but it took a little bit.
I can understand that. Yeah.
This is also not our first experience with the cheese wedge. It's only the first time it really matters.
Interesting.
There's also cola cans and stuff that you can play with.
Okay. I'm surprised that you can't, make a Coca-Cola bomb. Like, you shake it and then you throw it into the wall and it explodes bigger than it was.
I vaguely remember one of the Coke cans did end up, I think it's called Dream Cola too, but I vaguely remember, I don't know if this was actually true or not, but I vaguely remember one of them popping as it fell. So it does have some weight to it.
But okay, so then we wedge our way out of this.
We wedge our way out. And we do find an exit door, but walking towards it, we are suddenly falling down a shaft. There's a bed at the bottom, and as we approach the bed, we hear an alarm clock ringing in our ear.
Ooh.
Then the game gets weirder.
Did we not actually wake up?
Our loading bar almost finishes, gets 95%, then starts moving backwards.
Uh-oh.
And then suddenly the bar is over 100%, flying off the screen and dragging the entire game view with it before it fades to black. That's kind of the first, non-diegetic thing. It's weird. It's playing with diegetics.
Yeah, exactly.
So something has obviously gone wrong.
Right.
An alarm wakes us up in a sleep study bedroom. There's the bed and the alarm clock, and it's 3 a.m. We're in Suite F in what looks to be a hotel, though things are off the further we walk. Basically, it's a research corridor, a bunch of suites for research.
Okay.
Corridors shrink down. Halls extend away from us, but protrude from the wall as we get closer.
Huh.
Others seem to bend away from us.
All right.
This is the part where I started to feel sick. Not in this room, but this is where I started to kind of feel the music and the red carpeting and the look of everything just really messed with me a little bit.
Huh. Interesting.
It just all seemed to blend together in a way that my brain didn't like, but it didn't hate yet.
Well, I would imagine with motion sickness, it's
it's a slow creep up, and then it's oh.
Well, also that it's kind of like your brain is under the idea that it's moving, and once it realizes it hasn't been moving all this time, there's just all this confusion.
Yeah. It's here that we meet Dr. Glenn Pierce, or rather, it's here that we first hear from Dr. Glenn Pierce. He's able to talk to us with a radio. He says things aren't going according to plan. They don't know where we are, but they are working on it. Throughout the rest of the game, he's a grounding force of sorts, though he always introduces himself with, "Hello, this is Dr. Glenn Pierce."
I wonder that. I really hope that doesn't become a "would you kindly" command.
Got to do BioShock sometime. This chapter introduces a new mechanic involving trompe-l'oeil.
Trompe-l'oeil?
TROMPEL''OEIL. You've likely seen stuff like this online, if not in person. Basically, images of objects have been fractured and projected onto various surfaces. By looking at all the fragments from the right perspective, they appear 3D.
Okay, yeah. Yes, I have seen this. I mean, I feel like this has been in the Art Institute of Chicago before, too.
Though in this dream, they not only appear 3D, but also materialize as 3D objects we can manipulate like the pawns and blocks before.
Okay.
Eventually, we are directed by Hello, this is Dr. Glenn Pierce, to a series of elevators that will slowly wake us up. Makes sense.
Oh, so it feels like a little bit kind of like of an Inception premise.
Yes. Later on, they also prepare us for the possibility that the elevators may not wake us up. We're dealing with dreams here after all, so...
Yeah, that's fair.
An alarm wakes us up in a sleep study bedroom like we've seen before. It's 4 a.m. and the halls are empty. We turn a corner and we find ourselves in an industrial hallway, and then we're in an art gallery. The orientation protocol faux GLaDOS then indicates that we attempted to use an unauthorized pathway.
Uh-oh.
Now we're stuck in a dream paradox. She advises that we subject ourselves to explosive mental overload to get out of the paradox.
That doesn't sound like that would actually work, but okay.
We move through an art gallery, though it's one without art. There's some jazz piano playing, though.
Okay.
The puzzles here are almost entirely based on the scaling mechanic we've talked about before. Most involved oversized dice. Some dice are warped, some are painted on walls, some fall apart when we touch them, and some end up being a doorway to the elevator out of here.
Are they all six-sided?
I do not remember.
Okay.
By this point, I had already had to stop playing. For those who are wondering and not patrons, the room that made me stop playing was before the moon, because there's a outdoor section you walk through.
Uh-oh.
And it takes you less time to cross it than it should.
Okay.
As you walk through it, the buildings in your peripheral squash behind you. So they look normal, and then as you walk, they all ripple and squash.
I'm having a hard time even imagining this.
Yeah. Once I realized that and started going back and forth to see if I was right, that's when it was like,
oh yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Sometimes you don't need to confirm something. You just need to move on.
Yes. So that's the room that kind of did it for me. And we left off with the dice. Okay. We take the elevator. We're out of there. An alarm wakes us up in a sleep study bedroom like we've seen before. It's 4 a.m. and the halls are empty, except for a radio. Dr. Pierce's voice returns and suggests we may be having feelings of worthlessness and self-doubt. Again, we turn a corner into an unfamiliar place, an industrial hall lined with doorways.
Huh.
Things take a turn. Lights flicker and cut out. A dim red light leads us through the darkness. A sign reads, "Emergency generator this way." We make our way through dark halls and past more flickering lights until we're in an industrial freezer. And then there's blood.
What?
A room with blood all over the floor. A bloody handprint next to a door that snaps shut, quite loudly in fact, as we approach it to look inside. As we escape this room, the door behind us slams shut as well. We're stuck in a dead end and must brave the darkness to find our way. Doors keep slamming behind us, and we find bloody rooms. Running forward leads to us falling down a pit that returns us to the room we were just in. Eventually, though, we can discover a rickety bridge hidden in the darkness.
Okay.
We hear from Hello, this is Dr. Glenn Pierce, again, before we make our way through a series of more dark hallways. The orientation protocol returns to admonish us for not subjecting ourselves to explosive mental overload by this point.
Yeah, that's why it doesn't work, because you naturally would not want to be subjected to trauma.
Yeah. For the remainder of the level, we use shadows and improvised light sources to feel our way through the dark, blood-spattered halls. Ultimately, we end up in a storage facility with the word idea at the end of the hall. When we activate this idea,
Yeah.
in very blatant IKEA-style iconography, we
love
see that the emergency generator we've been looking for. The lights all come on, light jazz starts playing, and only now can we see that the blood trails were spilled paint all along.
Oh.
We step into an elevator, and the level ends.
The way this is like if anybody else has watched the movie Being John Malkovich, I'm starting getting undertones of my favorite scene is when like Malkovich goes into his own brain, and there's this great moment where they're at the lounge, and when you enter your own brain, apparently you just see, different twisted versions of yourself, and there's a version of Malkovich playing the piano and a lounge singer, Lady Malkovich, going Malkovich, Malkovich, Malkovich. And it is So bizarre. And I just remember it being my favorite scene because it just made no sense and it was hilarious.
An alarm wakes us up in a sleep study bedroom like we've seen before. It's 6 a.m. and the halls are empty. The repetition is deliberately numbing, reinforcing the dream state and feeling of being stuck in an endless loop. This disorientation is further reiterated by the introduction of mechanics that clone objects as you touch them. We can literally make piles of objects. Need an alarm clock? Pop out a few dozen.
Ooh.
Once we're introduced to the cloning mechanic, the orientation protocol returns to note the dangers of dream overexposure. She warns us of hallucinations of dreaded or annoying objects as you walk into a room with a ringing alarm clock and unrealistic beliefs about the length of hallways, which, to be honest, we've been experiencing multiple times by this point.
Right. So how long have we been in this dream is now
Yes.
the question.
The cloning puzzles continue throughout the level, but the most iconic is the dreaded beeping alarm clock being used as building blocks to escape a room.
Oh, that sounds so annoying. I'm already like, it's like nails on chalkboard. I'm already irritated.
In the latter half of the level, the orientation protocol lets us know Dr. Pierce was attempting to contact us, but she's unwilling to relay his messages.
This is not a good sign.
Our lifeline has been cut. The one touch point in the mess of a lucid dream is gone. Then a brief moment of hope as Dr. Pierce's radio appears again. Alas, his speech is completely garbled nonsense. And the level ends if we step onto yet another elevator.
Okay. A lot of elevators. Are they all going up or down?
I do not remember. I don't know if they actually go up or down there. I think you just walk onto them if I remember correctly. I could
You
be
walk
unfair.
in and they close the door and then you go somewhere.
Yeah. An alarm wakes us up in a sleep study bedroom like we've seen before. It's 7 a.m. Everything is a dreamlike quality, soft focus like an old film. The music, which has been the type of jazz music we'd find in museums, lobbies, and elevators, is now replaced with more calming music. It's like the game has stopped trying to convince us that we've woken up, where we step out of the bedroom into a film theater playing a loop of clouds.
So this kind of reminds me of, I've, for most of my adult life, suffered, in fact, and as a teenager, suffered with sleep paralysis. And one of the things that's the worst about sleep paralysis is that you can get into a loop of thinking you've woken up and you've just had a dream about you trying to get out of bed.
Yeah.
And I've discovered that one of the best ways to combat sleep paralysis is not to try to fight it actively, but to actually let yourself go deeper into sleep, and then you can wake up. And I don't think that necessarily works for everybody, but that works for me. But in the way you're describing how these levels progress in this story, I think we're at the point where we're just giving, you're right, like giving in to the fact that we are asleep. And that is where we're meant to be at this moment.
Around the corner is a radio and, hello, this is Dr. Glenn Pierce, provides a calming message that we've reappeared on their monitors. There's a light at the end of the tunnel.
Oh.
However, before long we're back to puzzles. The theme herein is non-Euclidean objects and spaces, doorways and hallways that lead to spaces with different scales. The level explores this idea in ways that work with the scale mechanic, which gets very motion sickness inducing at times.
Yikes.
The first puzzle forces us to expand a dollhouse until we can walk into it. Then we exit through a different door and finally have to enlarge it enough to fit through a small, tiny door inside the dollhouse.
Wait, say that again? What happened there?
Don't worry about it.
There was a lot of bigoting and smallening that I just
There's a lot of embiggening, yes.
I could not keep up with any of it.
An alarm wakes us up in a sleep study bedroom like we've seen before. It's 3 a.m. The sleep study office is gone. Only industrial halls exist here, and a new voice shows up. The emergency exit protocol tells us to prepare to wake up. But then the orientation protocol Faux GLaDOS stops us from waking up and declares that we must stay lucid dreaming indefinitely.
What?
And then she follows through with a promise. An alarm wakes us up in a sleep study bedroom like we've seen before. It's 3 a.m. We turn off the alarm and walk around the sleep study office. When we get to the lobby, we hear an alarm. An alarm wakes us up in a sleep study bedroom like we've seen before. It's 3 a.m. We turn off the alarm and walk around the sleep study office. We get half as far toward the lobby when the alarm goes off.
This is the part of sleep paralysis I hate the most. When I think that I've woken up And I haven't. I've literally had dreams where, like, I've woken up and I've been talking to a friend for 10 minutes. And it turns out, no, I've been asleep and I have to try to wake up again. Like, you literally have this happen, like, 10 or 12 times sometimes, the worst. Like, this happened a lot in college. And I hated it. I absolutely hated it.
An alarm wakes us up in a sleep-study bedroom like we've seen before. It's 3 a.m. We turn off the alarm and step out of the bedroom, and the alarm goes off. An alarm wakes us up in a sleep-study bedroom like we've seen before. It's 3 a.m. We turn off the alarm, and the lights go out. An alarm wakes us up in a sleep-study bedroom like we've seen before. It's 3 a.m., but something's very wrong. The bedroom is on its side. We fall out of the doorway into what looks like a lunch buffet.
Lunch buffet?
Another alarm is beeping. An alarm wakes us up in a sleep-study bedroom like we've seen before.
Okay, I'm going to go
It's 3 a.m.
insane hearing Mystic do this over and over again. What the heck?
I had to do a lot of copy-paste for some of this. The sleep-study office is now only 2 hallways. The only way out is a painting of clouds in our room. Once through this portal, and the music sets a new mood. It's that same jazz music again. Dr. Pierce returns, but it's a pre-recorded orientation message, not a direct contact.
Okay.
We're back in industrial hallways. Then everything tilts and we fall through down through the hallway. The whole world is on its side. We keep falling through doorways into new rooms until we land in a ballroom with a high door and a tiny spiral staircase we can pull our scaling trick on. However, when we drop the staircase on the floor, it causes the floor to fall out from under us. Everything is off rails, more so than before. The music ramps up into a frantic mix at this point. We enter an elevator and find ourselves in a hallway that leads back in itself infinitely.
Oh.
There's no way out until we figure out that, much like that one game in the beginner's guide we covered, we have to look the opposite direction of where we're going.
Oh, interesting.
The game then goes on to throw every trick it can at us, having every world change as often as we touch an object or jump down from a ledge or turn off an alarm. The roller coaster only ends when we step out of an elevator and into an infinite parking lot containing a bedroom with a ringing alarm. Once we turn off the alarm, the level ends. A bedroom in an industrial setting, not one we've seen before. No clock. Are we awake? Foglados actually chimes in and says, no. We're stuck in a new section of the lucid dreaming system. We can only interact with a single small building in a diorama of a strip mall. Under closer inspection, the building is the sleep study building that we were in. Picking up the building causes the room we're in to creak. Dropping it causes the world to shake and dust to fall from the ceiling.
This sounds like some really crazy programming of a set for a video game. You know, like you had these 2 rooms that technically never touch each other, but because it's easier to just build them on the same plane, you did.
We've picked up the building we're in, which is insane, but dreams be that way.
Yes.
We can rescale the building and enter it, and that's all. After a time, the orientation protocol warns us not to create a paradox, meaning we shouldn't meet ourselves, and you know what we're going to do. Exactly what she tells us not to do.
Right.
When we do, the world literally shatters and dissolves before our eyes.
Okay. I mean, it's just a dream at this point. It's not like you can kill yourself in the dream.
When we recover, we're in a white space with white sky. Ethereal music plays around us. We enter a black, non-Euclidean space that feels like an M.C. Escher piece. Everything is black and white. We end up falling a bit before we walk toward a white doorway. Falling again, we go through a black doorway.
Okay.
Hello, this is Dr. Glenn Pierce, returns and starts a reflective monologue. As we make our way through a labyrinth of black and white rooms and relatively simple puzzles, he reflects on how difficult it is to change one's perspective. The level ends as we endlessly fall into a giant alarm clock blinking 7:59 a.m. An alarm wakes us up in a sleep study bedroom like we've seen before. It's 8 a.m.
I'm going to commit acts of violence against Mystic with all of this repetition.
As you turn off the alarm, you're transported to spaces from previous levels. Dr. Pierce reveals that everything you've experienced was completely intentional.
Okay.
That many people who come there are caught up with impossible problems. But only seem impossible because people are so afraid of failure that they can't see the problem from a new perspective. They end up in a pattern of trying the same thing to solve problems, which of course leads to failure. They aren't changing how they attack a problem. We, as players, have now seen things from a new perspective, persevered when we were told things were wrong, that we were on the wrong path, and soon we'll wake up, and part of us will say that this was not real, but it can be real as we believed it to be. All there's left to do is to wake up. And we roll the credits.
Ah, so the lesson is at the end.
Yes.
There it is.
And there are people who really got into this lesson. And again,
yeah,
games can be used for this type of therapy as well when it comes to all sorts of mental health aspects. And again, just having someone tell you that look from a different perspective can be enough, even if it's a game telling you.
Right.
So now,
yeah,
this is a game that is light on story. We basically have retold the game.
yes.
One of the main things I've seen when people review this is it's a great game. The sequel should expand upon the story a bit and give some more context to a world beyond it. Like Portal has a world outside of you.
Yes.
And this
Very
should have, and this should, but I don't know if that would help a lot. It may actually rob some of this.
I think the thing about a dream is, once again, it just makes sense when you're in it.
Yes.
And then as soon as you leave it, it does not make sense. You may still have learned something or gained something from it,
Yes.
but it no longer makes sense with the world that you live in. And I think that's fine, that you can still retain something useful from a dream without having to agree with it once you leave it, or have it fit perfectly someplace in your life, you know?
Now, this played a lot with, obviously it played a lot with perception and perspective, but it also played a lot with advances in gaming technology when it comes to how we build games these days.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to see if they do a sequel, what they could do differently, or something like this in VR would be not something I'd ever play, but it would be interesting to hear how that works.
Well, and it's also very interesting, like, now that you've said it like that, where, we've talked about it in previous stories telling where we've talked about, games talking about the mind, and the idea
Hellblade being one of the big ones.
Yeah. And the idea in there of the lie you tell yourself. And it feels like this faux Gladys, this procedural feminine voice is the lie you tell yourself. Like, you're not supposed to do that. You can't do that.
Right.
So you're going, and you are in a dream, and in a dream you can do whatever you want. Like, whenever if you're one of those people who can realize you're dreaming, suddenly you can fly, and suddenly, like, you're punching Caesar in the face, and you're taking over all of Rome, and, like, just all this great stuff.
So you're saying that they're externalizing the internal doubt.
Yes.
Kind of. Yeah.
So it is, I think there's plenty of stuff they could add to it, and if they did like what Hellblade does, and actually, like, I don't know if they did for this game, but if they could speak more to people who are experts on the mind, what it sounds like to me is a little bit, and I could only speak somewhat to what I've heard other people talk about, is cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yes.
That idea that you have to keep doing these repetitive, and it doesn't necessarily make sense, but once you start doing certain repetitions, your brain gets used to it and helps you break the bad habits in your brain and replace them with something that's at least more useful to you.
It is an interesting game also in the fact that we're not telling a story of Dr. Glenn Pierce or anything. We're not even telling the story of our character beyond the fact that they are trying to get over a problem.
We're telling a general vague story of what progress looks like.
Yes.
I think that's,
Which could be said of any game. In terms of, like, there's a progress at point A to point B. Here, where actually the progress is the only point.
Yes. Yeah. I think I think that would be my argument against that all games are like that. I think a lot of games, a lot of great games are linear. It used to be. I don't want to say linear as if it's a dirty word. It's obviously not. We like a good linear game here. You just have to do it well.
Yeah.
A lot of games are linear, or a lot of games, they branch out, but they only have, like, a certain amount of endpoints. And the whole point is that you started at point A and you did all of these very important things that connected with all these important characters and places to get to point B, and then that's the story. And the point was to get to point B, and this one is literally,
this even point
is the quest is the quest.
The quest is the quest. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, this is also in the middle of someone else. This is the middle of our character's story, and it's one night of that character's story.
This is the dream that half of the protagonists we've talked about throughout our podcast series has had at some point while they're trying to figure out how to progress in their story. You could see Shepard doing it. You could see Velvet doing it. You could see Senua doing it. Like this is.
You can see Vice doing. You see almost all of our protagonists doing it.
Yeah. It is the thing that they have to do in order to overcome and achieve greater things. And what this game is trying to do is tell the story of how one does it. It is really all about the process.
Yeah. And clearly, obviously, a game is not going to be a replacement for a professional help or anything.
Absolutely.
If you are in some sort of mental distress or you're feeling whatever, please seek professional help.
Please seek professional help.
But, if the game is what gets you to be like, oh, this gives me some idea of something that I could do, use that as your impetus to get some help.
Yes.
And thank you for listening. I don't know.
No, I think it's a good place to end on is I think, and there's a lot of games who do this within their storytelling, but I think this one is very specifically just prompting people to be reflective in a way that challenges you to grow. Because it's really, the thing about being human is really easy for us to be stuck doing the same thing all the time because we're very much creatures about survival. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the easiest thing to do to survive is to not change. There's very few of us who are fine with change on a regular basis. And a lot of us who are fine with change on a regular basis, it's because we're broken and we need different kinds of therapy than this.
Right.
I'm myself included. Like I had to get therapy to realize how to deal with. I had constant change growing up in a way that I don't think was healthy. And now I'm at a point where I'm figuring out the change that should happen versus the change that shouldn't.
There's a difference between stagnation and stability.
Yes. And I think, I think most people suffer with the stagnation part.
Yes.
I think that's, so.
This is becoming a mental health podcast, though. So,
tune in
next week
we're not mental health. We're advocates, but we're not professionals.
In any sense of the word.
Absolutely not.
Thank you guys for listening.
Well, that's Mystic cutting it off before we have a lawsuit on our hands.
Well, that, and I don't know where else to go with the game at this point.
No. So. It sounds like even now that we said the whole story, it's worth playing it because maybe you experiencing it, maybe it'll make you think about something you didn't know. Just be cognizant about
the motion sickness.
Yes. Take your Dramamine and be very aware. And hopefully you're not traumatized about it reminding you of sleep paralysis like this whole experience was for me.
Oh, did you
what?
Did you like my repetition there? With the same
tone?
No,
that genuinely feels like sleep paralysis. Like I don't know, Mystic, if you've ever really had it that bad or ever.
I've experienced it before, but yeah.
I've had it really bad. I've literally woken up in a dream 20 different times, just like that. I
apologize for making those of you who have that problem relive it.
At me at Twitter at Lore Together and say, Safi, I have also woken up 20 times because of sleep paralysis. It is a scary experience. It is one of the scariest things your brain can do to you. So we should probably end it here. Yeah. So thank you for listening for the third time. Thank you for listening. If you're brave with their motion sickness queasiness, join us on that live stream Thursday after this airs, and we'll see if I need the bucket. Thanks for listening. Thanks. Bye. Bye.